She stood alone at the edge of town, a single valise in her hand, watching as the man who had promised her a future walked away without looking back. 5,000 miles from home, rejected within 3 days of her arrival, labeled too wild simply for having opinions and knowledge. What happened next would not only change her life, but transform an entire frontier community. This is the remarkable true story of a woman who found her worth not in conformity, but in courage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled over the rutted trail toward Pine Ridge, Colorado territory, sending dust swirling through the open windows. Emma Collins pressed a handkerchief to her nose, trying to shield herself from the worst of it. 6 days of travel had left her exhausted. Her blue traveling dress wrinkled beyond salvation, but excitement kept her spirits buoyant. Through the window, she caught her first glimpse of the Elk Mountain Range, massive peaks still crowned with snow despite the spring sunshine. First time out west? The older woman seated across from her smiled knowingly. Yes, Emma admitted. I'm to be married. The woman's eyebrows rose. Mail order? Emma nodded, straightening her shoulders slightly. There was no shame in it. Countless women had traveled this path before her, answering advertisements from men seeking wives in territories where women were scarce. Her circumstances had forced her hand. After her mother's prolonged illness and death had drained the family finances, Emma had few options left in Boston. Walter Simmons, she explained. He owns the general store in Pine Ridge. Simmons. The woman's expression changed subtly. Good mercantile, particular man, though. Emma's fingers tightened around her satchel, which contained not clothing or trinkets, but books, medical texts, botanical guides, and several controversial pamphlets on women's education. These were her true treasures, the ones she couldn't bear to leave behind. Walter had written that he sought a refined Eastern lady to bring civilization to his home. He hadn't specified what kind of refinement he expected. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of a dusty building marked Pine Ridge Station. Emma gathered her belongings, heart pounding as she prepared to meet the man who would become her husband. The driver helped her down, and she found herself standing on the main street of what appeared to be a growing but still rough-hewn town. Wooden boardwalks lined storefronts with hand-painted signs. Wilson's General Store, the Westwood Hotel, Thornton's Sheriff Office. A well-dressed man approached, his expression curious but reserved. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with neatly trimmed side whiskers and clothes that spoke of Eastern tastes, despite the frontier setting. "Miss Collins?" he inquired, removing his hat. "I'm Walter Simmons." Emma extended her hand, trying to appear both confident and appropriate. "Mr. Simmons, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." His handshake was brief, his eyes already assessing her appearance. She was painfully aware of her travel-worn state, but surely he would understand the rigors of the journey. "You've had a long trip," he said, taking her valise, but leaving her. "To carry her satchel of books. I've arranged a room for you at the Westwood Hotel until the wedding. Mrs. Holloway, our local matchmaker who helped arrange our correspondence, will call on you this afternoon to discuss preparations." His formality struck Emma as odd. This was, after all, the man she had agreed to marry, but perhaps proprieties were especially important in such a small community. "Thank you," she replied. "I'm looking forward to seeing your store as well. I've brought several catalogs with the latest merchandise from Boston that might interest you." Walter's stride faltered slightly. "You've brought business catalogs?" Emma nodded eagerly. "And ideas for expanding your inventory to appeal to the growing female population. From your letters, I gathered Pine Ridge is developing rapidly." He studied her with a new expression, one she couldn't quite decipher. Indeed. Well, here we are. The Westwood Hotel was modest but clean, its lobby furnished with mismatched chairs that suggested they'd traveled west in various wagons over the years. Walter spoke briefly with the proprietor, then turned back to Emma. "Mrs. Holloway will arrive at 2. Tomorrow, I'll show you the store and my home." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sure you'll want to rest from your journey." With that, he was gone, leaving Emma standing in the unfamiliar lobby, wondering why their first meeting felt so strained. Perhaps it was simply the awkwardness of their arrangement. They were, after all, strangers, about to become husband and wife. Her room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, washing stand, and window overlooking the main street. Emma unpacked quickly, then carefully arranged her books on the room's single shelf. She ran her fingers lovingly over their spines. Gray's Anatomy, Botanical Medicine of the Americas, Women's Education and Society. These volumes had been her companions and teachers during the long years of her mother's illness, when Emma had worked alongside a local midwife and developed skills few proper Boston ladies would admit to possessing. Precisely at 2 o'clock, a sharp knock announced Mrs. Holloway. The matchmaker was a formidable woman in her 50s, corseted to painful perfection, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Collins," she said, surveying the room and lingering briefly on the row of books. "Welcome to Pine Ridge. I trust your journey was uneventful." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. The journey was long but not unpleasant." The older woman settled herself in the room's only chair, leaving Emma to perch on the edge of the bed. "I've arranged for Reverend Peterson to perform the ceremony next Wednesday. That gives us a week for preparations and allows time for the community to meet you properly." She ran through a list of details. The church would be decorated with early spring flowers. Emma would stay at the hotel until the wedding night. There would be a small reception at Mayor Wilson's home afterward. Emma listened carefully, trying to quell the nervous flutter in her stomach. It was all happening so quickly. "Mr. Simmons is one of our most respected citizens," Mrs. Holloway continued. "His first wife, God rest her soul, was a model of propriety. We're all pleased he's found a suitable Eastern lady to take her place." Something in her tone made Emma glance up. The matchmaker was studying her with an evaluative gaze that felt uncomfortably like judgment. "Mr. Simmons mentioned you've brought books with you?" Mrs. Holloway inquired, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes," Emma replied, gesturing to the shelf. "I've always been fond of reading." Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned slightly. "Reading is a fine pastime in moderation, though excessive academic pursuits can strain a woman's delicate constitution. I'm sure you'll find your duties as a merchant's wife will leave little time for such indulgences." Before Emma could respond, the matchmaker rose. "Tomorrow evening you'll dine with the Wilsons, the mayor and his wife. They're eager to meet Walter's bride." After Mrs. Holloway departed, Emma sat quietly on the edge of the bed, a feeling of unease settling over her. She'd known adapting to frontier life would require adjustments, but she hadn't expected her books to cause concern. Surely her education would be an asset to her new husband, not a liability. The following morning, Walter arrived to escort her to his store and home. Wilson's General Store occupied a prime location on Pine Ridge's main street, a large, well-constructed building with wide display windows. Inside, the shelves were neatly stocked with everything from tools and hardware to fabrics and foodstuffs. "It's impressive," Emma said honestly, admiring the organization. "Have you considered adding a section for medicines and tonics? During my mother's illness, I learned about various remedies that might be useful here where doctors are scarce." Walter glanced at her sharply. "Dr. Mitchell handles the town's medical needs. I've no interest in competing with him." "Not competing," Emma clarified quickly. "Just offering basic remedies for common ailments. I have several recipes for effective herbal preparations." "Miss Collins," Walter interrupted, his voice cooler than before, I sought a wife to manage my household and assist with customers, not to introduce unfamiliar practices. Emma fell, silent, chastised. Perhaps she was being too forward too quickly. They crossed the street to a handsome two-story home set slightly apart from the other buildings. Inside, it was well furnished but sterile, a house maintained but not truly lived. Since his first wife's passing, "You'll have full responsibility for the household," Walter explained as they toured the rooms. "I take breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening. I expect the house to be well managed and suitable for entertaining business. Associates when necessary." He spoke as if outlining a position of employment rather than describing their future life together. Emma nodded, trying to imagine herself in these rooms, building a life with this formal, distant man. "The town's social circles are quite defined," Walter continued as they returned to the main floor. "Mrs. Wilson, the mayor's wife, essentially determines social standing here. Her approval is essential." That evening, Emma dressed carefully for dinner at the Wilson home, selecting her least wrinkled dress and arranging her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Walter collected her from the hotel, offering his arm with formal correctness. Mayor Wilson's home was the grandest in Pine Ridge, clearly built to impress and intimidate. Martha Wilson greeted them at the door, her smile warm but her eyes calculating, as they assessed Emma from head to toe. "Miss Collins, we're delighted to welcome you to Pine Ridge," she said, leading them into a parlor where several other guests already waited. "Walter has told us so little about you. We're all curious about the woman who captured our most eligible bachelor." The evening that followed was a carefully orchestrated interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Emma found herself fielding questions about her family, modestly comfortable until mother's extended illness, her education completed at Miss Harrington's Academy in Boston, and her reasons for coming west, seeking new opportunities. "And what accomplishments do you bring to your marriage?" Mrs. Wilson inquired during dinner, her voice suggesting this was the most important question of all. Emma hesitated, conscious of Walter's gaze. "I'm well versed in household management. I also have some knowledge of bookkeeping that might be useful in the store." "Bookkeeping?" Martha Wilson's eyebrows rose. "How unusual." "Miss Collins has many unusual interests," Walter commented, his tone making it clear this wasn't a compliment. "She's quite academically inclined." The slight pause spoke volumes. Around the table, expressions shifted subtly, curiosity becoming something closer to suspicion. "I believe education serves us all, men and women alike," Emma said carefully, unwilling to misrepresent herself completely, though of course a woman's primary duty is to her home and family. This concession seemed to mollify the table somewhat, but Emma felt Walter's disapproval like a physical weight. She had failed some test she hadn't known she was taking. The walk back to the hotel was conducted in uncomfortable silence. At the door, Walter finally spoke. "I believe we should discuss our arrangement further before proceeding, perhaps tomorrow morning at 10. Emma nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Of course. She slept poorly that night, replaying the evening in her mind, wondering what she should have done differently. Pine Ridge was clearly more conservative than she had anticipated, but surely Walter wouldn't reject her simply for being educated. The next morning proved her wrong. Walter arrived precisely at 10, his expression grave. They sat in the small hotel parlor, far enough from other guests to have privacy, but still within sight, propriety maintained even in this difficult moment. "Miss Collins," he began formally, "I feel I must be direct. When we corresponded, I Sought a wife of gentle breeding and traditional values to help maintain my standing in this community. After our interactions these past 2 days, I'm concerned we may not be well matched. Emma's hands twisted in her lap. Because I express opinions. Because I've read books that women typically don't. Because you seem to have expectations that aren't compatible with life here, Walter replied stiffly. Your interest in medicines and business matters, your outspoken nature on women's education. These qualities might be tolerated in Boston, but here they would make you an outsider. More importantly, they would reflect poorly on my business and standing. The blow, though expected, still stung. You find me too wild, she said quietly. Walter winced at the directness but didn't deny it. I believe the term unsuitable is more appropriate. You require a different situation than I can offer. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. I've purchased your return ticket to Boston. The stage leaves tomorrow morning. Emma stared at the envelope but didn't take it. And if I choose not to return to Boston? Walter frowned. I don't see what other options. I came west to build a life, Mr. Simmons. I sold everything I couldn't carry to make this journey. There's nothing for me to return to. Nevertheless, I cannot proceed with our arrangement. He placed the envelope on the table between them and stood. I wish you well, Miss Collins, truly. But Pine Ridge requires a certain kind of woman, and you are not she. After he left, Emma sat motionless, the envelope untouched before her. Humiliation and anger warred within her chest, along with a more practical concern. What was she to do now? Her funds were limited, barely enough for 2 weeks' lodging. The return ticket represented the sensible choice, retreat to familiar territory and try to rebuild. Yet something within her rebelled at the thought. She had come west seeking purpose and possibility. Was she to surrender that dream because one man found her too educated, too opinionated, too wild for his comfort? That afternoon, Emma walked Pine Ridge's streets, weighing her options with each step. The town was growing, with new buildings under construction at its edges. Surely there were opportunities here for someone willing to work hard, even a woman, alone. As she passed the small building marked Dr. T. Mitchell, physician, she paused. Perhaps the doctor might need assistance, someone with knowledge of herbal remedies and basic medical care. It was a desperate thought, likely to be rejected. But what did she have to lose? Before she could reconsider, the door swung open and a tall man in a rumpled white shirt emerged, medical bag in hand. He nearly collided with Emma before stopping abruptly. "Pardon me," he said, his voice deep and slightly hurried. "Are you in need of medical attention?" "No," Emma replied quickly. "I was actually wondering." But the rest of her question died on her lips as a frantic shout came from down the street. "Dr. Mitchell, come quick. Mary's time has come, but something's wrong." The doctor immediately turned toward the desperate voice, but not before giving Emma an apologetic look. "Another time, perhaps?" As he hurried away, Emma stood undecided on the boardwalk, watching his retreating figure. The encounter felt significant somehow, a door opening briefly before closing again. What she didn't know then was how soon that door would reopen, and how completely it would change her life. Emma returned to the Westwood Hotel, her future. Still uncertain as twilight settled over Pine Ridge, the small lobby was empty except for the proprietor's wife, who glanced up from her mending with undisguised curiosity. News of Walter's rejection had clearly spread already. Emma could read it in the woman's eyes, a mixture of pity and judgment that made her spine stiffen. She nodded politely and continued to her room, unwilling to become the subject of further gossip. Once alone, Emma removed her boots and sat. On the edge of the bed, the weight of her situation pressing down like a physical force. The return ticket to Boston lay on the small writing desk where she had placed it, a pragmatic escape route that nonetheless felt like surrender. She had until morning to decide. Outside her window, lanterns illuminated the main street as Pine Ridge settled into evening routines. Across the way, light spilled from the windows of Wilson's General Store, where Walter would be tallying the day's receipts, perhaps already composing advertisements for a more suitable bride. Emma turned away from the view, her gaze falling instead on her small collection of books. She ran her fingers over Botanical Medicine of the Americas, recalling the hours spent studying its pages while her mother slept fitfully during her long illness. Those hard-earned skills had marked her as too unconventional, too independent, too wild for this frontier town. Yet they were the only real assets she possessed beyond the meager funds remaining from her journey. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Emma quickly smoothed her skirts and hair before opening it, half expecting to find Mrs. Holloway with some final judgment disguised as concern. Instead, a slight, fair-haired woman stood in the hallway, hands nervously clasped before her. "Miss Collins, I'm Clara Peterson, the Reverend's wife. May I speak with you for a moment?" Emma stepped back to allow her entry, surprised by this unexpected visitor. Clara Peterson seemed younger than Emma had initially thought during their brief introduction at the Wilson dinner, perhaps only a few years older than Emma's 23 years. She perched nervously on the edge of the room's single chair, declining Emma's offer of water with a small shake of her head. "I wanted to express my regret about your situation," Clara began softly. "The community can be rather rigid in its expectations." Emma remained standing, unwilling to display any weakness before this representative of Pine Ridge society. "You mean they've decided I'm unsuitable based on 2 days' acquaintance and a few books?" Clara winced slightly at the directness, but didn't deny it. Walter Simmons has specific expectations for a wife. Perhaps it's better to discover the mismatch now rather than after marriage. The gentle kindness in her voice softened Emma's defensive posture. "I suppose that's true," she conceded, sinking onto the bed, "though it leaves me in a difficult position." Clara hesitated before speaking again. "My husband mentioned you have some knowledge of herbal remedies." Emma looked up sharply, instantly wary. Had she been wrong about Clara's intentions? Was this visit merely to gather more evidence of her unsuitability? But the minister's wife continued in the same gentle tone. "Our youngest, Abigail, suffers from terrible coughing fits, especially at night. Dr. Mitchell prescribed a tonic, but it seems to upset her stomach terribly. I wondered if—" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the request. Emma's wariness gave way to understanding. Clara Peterson was risking her own social standing by seeking help from the woman already branded too unconventional. "You're hoping I might know an alternative treatment," Emma finished for her. Clara nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I wouldn't ask, but she's been so miserable and nothing we've tried has helped." Emma moved to her books, selecting the Botanical Medicine volume. "How old is your daughter?" 4. The fits started last winter and never fully subsided. Emma turned pages until she found the section she sought. "Does she cough more at night? Is the sound dry or wet?" As Clara described the symptoms, Emma made mental notes, recognizing the pattern from cases she had observed in Boston. "It sounds like a form of bronchial spasm. There's a preparation of wild cherry bark and honey that might help without the stomach distress. I could mix some for you if you have access to the ingredients." Clara's eyes brightened with hope. "Could you? I've been so worried about her." Emma hesitated only briefly. Helping the minister's child might ease her path in Pine Ridge, but it might also reinforce the town's view of her as dangerously untraditional. Still, she couldn't refuse aid to a suffering child. "I'll need a few items from the apothecary section at Wilson's store," she said, making a quick list on a scrap of paper. Clara took it, glancing over the ingredients with relief. I can get these tomorrow, though perhaps it would be better if I don't mention why. The implied secrecy stung, but Emma understood its necessity. Of course. As Clara rose to leave, she paused at the door. Miss Collins, may I ask what you plan to do now? Will you return east? Emma shook her head slowly. I don't know yet. There's nothing for me in Boston. That's why I came west in the first place. But I'm not sure what opportunities exist for a woman alone in Pine Ridge. Clara's expression softened with sympathy. It won't be easy. This town values tradition above all else. But perhaps she seemed to reconsider her words. Dr. Mitchell sometimes employs assistants when his practice grows busy. With spring coming and new settlers arriving, he might be in need of help. It was the second time that day the doctor's name had arisen as a possibility. Emma considered it carefully. Would the town accept a woman in such a position? Clara's smile held a trace of sadness. Not easily, but Thomas Mitchell is respected for his skill, if not his conventional thinking. He came to Pine Ridge 2 years ago and has saved enough lives that people overlook his peculiarities. She didn't elaborate on what those might be, and Emma didn't ask. After Clara departed, Emma sat in the gathering darkness, turning over this new possibility in her mind. Working for the doctor would certainly mark her as unconventional, perhaps permanently. Yet what alternative did she have? Return to Boston, with no prospects, or attempt to forge a place for herself here? She was still contemplating this choice when shouts from the street below drew her to the window. A man on horseback had pulled up before the hotel, his urgent calls bringing the proprietor running outside. Fetch Dr. Mitchell, John Kendall's wife is having her baby, but something's gone wrong. He's out at the Harrison place. The desperation in the rider's voice carried clearly through the night air. Without conscious decision, Emma grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs, emerging onto the boardwalk just as the hotel owner returned, shaking his head. Doctor rode out to the Harrison place this morning. Won't be back till tomorrow at least. The rider, a young man with fear etched clearly on his face, slumped in his saddle. Mary's been in labor since yesterday. The midwife says the baby's turned wrong, but she doesn't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do. Emma stepped forward before she could reconsider. I have some experience with difficult births, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I assisted a midwife in Boston for several years. The young man looked at her with desperate hope, while the hotel proprietor frowned disapprovingly. Miss Collins, this is hardly appropriate. There's no time for propriety, Emma interrupted firmly. How far is your homestead, Mr. Kendall? About 5 miles, ma'am, beyond Sawmill Creek. The hotel owner shook his head. The creek's running high with the spring melt. Bridge might not even be passable right now. You can't possibly... I'll need a horse, Emma said, ignoring him and addressing Kendall directly. And I'll need to bring some supplies. Her heart pounded as she made the decision, knowing it might seal her fate in Pine Ridge. But a woman and child were in danger, and she had knowledge that might help. What choice did she really have? Within 20 minutes, Emma was riding behind John Kendall on his horse, a hastily gathered collection of clean cloths, herbal preparations, and her medical text tucked into a borrowed satchel. The night had grown colder, and she was grateful for the heavy shawl as they rode out of town. Pine Ridge soon fell behind them, its lights fading into the darkness as they followed the rough trail toward the homesteads that lay beyond Sawmill Creek. John spoke little, his worry for his wife evident in the tension of his shoulders and the pace he set. Emma used the time to mentally review what she knew about complicated births, the methodical recollection of knowledge helping to calm her own nervousness. She was no doctor, but she had assisted the midwife with several difficult deliveries in Boston. If the baby was simply positioned incorrectly, she might be able to help. They had ridden for perhaps half an hour when the sound of rushing water reached them, growing louder with each passing minute. As they crested a small rise, Emma saw Sawmill Creek below, a dark ribbon of water churning angrily in the faint moonlight, far wider and more forceful than she had imagined. The wooden bridge that spanned it seemed perilously inadequate, with water already lapping at its lower supports. John reined in the horse, studying the crossing with obvious concern. "Creek's higher than it was this morning," he muttered. "But we have to cross here. It's the only way to reach the homestead." Emma swallowed hard, eyeing the rushing water. "Is there another route? A ford upstream, perhaps?" John shook his head. "Not for Miles and Mary." He didn't finish the sentence, but Emma understood. They had no choice. "Then we cross carefully," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They dismounted, and John led the horse cautiously onto the bridge. The wooden planks shifted slightly beneath their weight, the entire structure trembling with the force of the water below. Emma kept her eyes fixed on John's back, trying not to look down at the churning darkness beneath the gaps in the planking. They were about halfway across when a horrible cracking sound split the night. The bridge shuddered violently, and Emma stumbled, grabbing for the crude railing. "Run!" John shouted, yanking the frightened horse forward. Emma tried to follow, but another crack sent a section of planking tilting beneath her feet. She lunged forward, but too late. The wood gave way, and suddenly she was falling, the icy water closing over her head with stunning force. The current caught her immediately, tumbling her beneath the surface. Emma fought against the disorientation, kicking desperately toward what she hoped was the surface. Her heavy skirts dragged at her, threatening to pull her under again. When her head finally broke the water, she gasped for air, coughing as the creek tried to pull her back down. "Miss Collins!" John's voice came from somewhere ahead, barely audible over the rushing water. Emma tried to call back, but another wave washed over her, filling her mouth with bitter, silty water. She was being carried downstream, away from the bridge, away from any hope of easy rescue. The cold shocked her system, making it difficult to think clearly as she fought to keep her head above water. Something dark loomed ahead, a fallen tree extending partway into the creek. Emma summoned her remaining strength and swam toward it, arms burning with effort. Her fingers scraped against rough bark, found purchase, and held. Inch by painful inch, she pulled herself toward the bank, the current fighting her every movement. Finally, her feet found purchase on the muddy bottom, and she dragged herself onto the shore, collapsing in exhaustion. For several minutes, Emma simply lay there, coughing up creek water and trying to gather her strength. She was soaked through, her dress heavy with water, her boots filled with mud. The night air, which had merely been cool before, now felt bitterly cold against her wet skin. She had to move or risk freezing. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself to her feet, surveying her surroundings in the dim moonlight. The bridge was nowhere in sight. The current had carried her a considerable distance downstream. She had no idea which direction John Kendall's homestead lay, or how far she had been swept from the trail. Worse, she had lost the borrowed satchel with her medical supplies in the creek. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently as she tried to decide what to do. Returning to Pine Ridge meant hours of walking in wet clothes through unfamiliar territory. Attempting to find the Kendall homestead seemed equally impossible in the darkness. As she stood there, indecision compounding her misery, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. "Miss Collins!" John Kendall's voice carried through the night. "Miss Collins, where are you?" Emma summoned what remained of her strength and called back, her voice raspy from creek water. "Here, by the fallen tree." The hoofbeats grew louder, and then John appeared, leading his horse along the creek bank. Relief washed over his face when he saw her. "Thank God! I thought you'd been swept away for certain." The ride to the Kendall homestead was a blur of discomfort for Emma. She shivered uncontrollably against John's back as they rode, her wet clothing sapping her body heat despite the borrowed blanket wrapped around her shoulders. By the time a small cabin came into view, its windows glowing with lantern light, Emma was finding it difficult to focus her thoughts. The cabin door flew open as they approached, a gray-haired woman appearing in the doorway. "John Kendall, where? Have you been? Mary's getting worse," and she broke off as she registered Emma's presence and condition. "Heaven preserve us, what happened?" "Bridge collapsed," John explained tersely, helping Emma dismount. "Miss Collins nearly drowned." "How's Mary?" "The pains are coming faster, but the baby still won't come," the older woman replied, ushering them inside. "Who's this now?" "Miss Collins from town. She knows about birthing." The cabin's interior was warm and close after the cold night air. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, and kerosene lamps cast a golden glow over the simple furnishings. From behind a hanging quilt that divided the single room came the sound of a woman's pain-filled groan. The gray-haired woman, whom John introduced as Mrs. Parker, a neighbor, looked Emma over dubiously. "You're soaked through, girl. You'll catch your death before you can help anyone." Emma forced her mind to focus, pushing aside her own discomfort. "I need dry clothing and hot water," she said, her teeth still chattering, "and I'll need clean cloths, anything you have." Mrs. Parker hurried to comply, returning with a simple dress that was too large but blessedly dry. "Mary's my daughter," she explained as she helped Emma change behind the crude privacy of a blanket held up as a screen. Her time wasn't supposed to come for another 3 weeks, but the baby had other ideas. Once dry and wrapped in a shawl borrowed from Mrs. Parker, Emma felt her clarity returning. "How long has she been in labor?" "Since yesterday morning. The baby's turned wrong. I can feel it, but I don't know how to fix it." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Let me see her." Behind the quilt, Mary Kendall lay on a bed made up with clean but well-worn linens. She was young, no more than 20, her face pale and sheened with sweat, her nightgown soaked through. Her swollen belly tensed visibly with another contraction, drawing a whimper of pain from her cracked lips. Emma moved to her side, speaking softly. "Mary, I'm Emma Collins. I've come to help with the baby." The young woman's eyes flickered open, fever bright with exhaustion and pain. "Can't. Come. Hurts so much." "I know it hurts," Emma soothed, taking her hand. "I'm going to examine you now to see what's happening with the baby. Try to relax if you can." With Mrs. Parker's assistance, Emma carefully examined Mary, her hands gently probing the contours of the distended abdomen, her mind recalling diagrams from medical texts and practical lessons from the Boston midwife. What she found confirmed her fears. The baby was indeed positioned incorrectly, shoulder presenting instead of the head. Without intervention, neither mother nor child would likely survive the night. Emma straightened, meeting Mrs. Parker's worried gaze. "The baby is presenting shoulder first," she explained quietly. "It needs to be turned." The older woman's face tightened with fear. "Can you do that? The midwife in town said it was too dangerous to try." Emma hesitated. She had assisted with such a procedure once, but never performed it herself. The risks were significant, yet doing nothing guaranteed tragedy. "I've seen it done," she admitted. "And I understand the procedure, but I won't lie to you, it's dangerous for both Mary and the baby." John, who had been hovering anxiously nearby, stepped forward. "Do what you have to," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just save them if you can." Emma nodded, then turned to Mrs. Parker. "I'll need more hot water, all your clean linens, and soap if you have it. And John, I saw wild yarrow growing near the creek bank. If you can find some, bring me the flowers. They'll help slow bleeding if needed." For the next hour, Emma worked methodically, using techniques she had observed and studied but never before performed alone. She spoke continuously to Mary in a calm, reassuring tone, explaining each step, each sensation before it happened. When the moment came to physically turn the baby, Emma took a deep breath and offered a silent prayer before beginning the delicate, dangerous manipulation. Mary's screams tore through the cabin as Emma worked, her hands guided by memory and instinct, sweat beading on her forehead despite the lingering chill in her bones. The procedure seemed to last an eternity, each second measured in Mary's labored breathing and John's anxious pacing just beyond the quilt. Finally, Emma felt the shift she had been working toward. The baby rotating into the correct position, head now oriented toward the birth canal. "There," she murmured with relief, sitting back on her heels. "The worst is over, Mary. Now we can help your baby come properly." The delivery that followed was still difficult, but no longer impossible. As dawn began to lighten the cabin's small windows, Mary gave a final exhausted push, and the baby slipped into Emma's waiting hands, a small but perfect girl with a healthy, angry cry. Emma worked quickly to tie off the cord and clean the infant before placing her in Mary's trembling arms. The new mother's face transformed with wonder as she gazed down at her daughter, the hours of agony temporarily forgotten in this moment of miracle. John knelt beside the bed, one large hand gently touching the baby's dark hair, tears tracking unashamedly down his weathered face. Emma stepped back, allowing the family their private joy as she methodically cleaned up with Mrs. Parker's help. She was bone-weary, her body still aching from the creek's abuse, but a profound satisfaction filled her. Here, at least, her unconventional knowledge had been not only accepted, but desperately needed. Mrs. Parker touched her arm, drawing her attention. The older woman's expression had transformed from earlier suspicion to undisguised gratitude. "You saved them both," she said simply. "Dr. Mitchell himself couldn't have done better." Emma smiled tiredly. "I only did what I could with what I know." "Well, what you know is worth more than all the proper manners in Pine Ridge," Mrs. Parker declared firmly. She pressed a cup of hot tea into Emma's hands. "Drink this, then rest. John can take you back to town when you've recovered your strength." Emma sank onto a bench near the fire, cradling the warm cup between her still-chilled hands. She hadn't realized until this moment how completely exhausted she was. Now that the emergency had passed, the events of the past 24 hours crashed over her. Walter's rejection, the decision to help the Kendalls, the terrifying moments in the creek, and the tense birth that followed. She must have dozed, sitting upright, because the next thing she knew, the cabin door was opening, admitting a tall figure silhouetted against the mid-morning light. "Mrs. Parker, I came as quickly as I could. How is Mary?" a deep voice asked. Emma blinked, recognizing Dr. Thomas Mitchell from their brief encounter the previous day. He hadn't noticed her yet, his attention focused on Mrs. Parker's rapid explanation of the night's events. As the doctor moved toward the curtained bed area, his gaze swept the room and landed on Emma. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by evident surprise. "Miss Collins," Emma supplied, rising from the bench despite her stiffness. "Emma Collins." Dr. Mitchell studied her for a long moment, taking in her borrowed dress, her still damp hair, and the exhaustion that must have been plain on her face. "Mrs. Parker tells me you turned a shoulder presentation and delivered the child successfully," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Emma lifted her chin slightly, expecting skepticism or disapproval. "I assisted a midwife in Boston for several years during my mother's illness. I've seen the procedure performed, though I've never done it independently before tonight." Instead of the censure she anticipated, Dr. Mitchell's expression registered something like professional interest. That's impressive training for a layperson, Miss Collins. Would you mind explaining exactly what technique you used? The question was asked without condescension, one practitioner to another. For the next few minutes, Emma found herself describing the birth in careful detail, using proper medical terminology from her reading. Dr. Mitchell listened attentively, asking precise questions at several points. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. You took exactly the right approach. I'd like to examine mother and child now with your assistance if you're willing. The request, so matter-of-fact, so accepting of her abilities, momentarily stunned Emma. Dr. Mitchell seemed to mistake her silence for hesitation. Unless you're too exhausted from your ordeal. Mrs. Parker mentioned something about the bridge collapsing. I'm fine, Emma said quickly, following him toward the curtained area, just surprised to be asked rather than told to step aside. A brief smile crossed the doctor's face. Miss Collins, anyone who successfully manages a shoulder presentation after nearly drowning has earned the right to assist, regardless of formal credentials. As they examined Mary and the baby together, Emma found herself responding to Dr. Mitchell's professional manner. He treated her not as a woman who had overstepped her bounds, but as a capable assistant with valuable skills. When they had confirmed that both mother and child were doing well, Dr. Mitchell turned to Emma with an appraising look. You have a natural aptitude for this work, he said quietly, so only she could hear. It's rare to find someone with both, the knowledge and the temperament required for medicine. Emma couldn't quite hide her pleasure at the compliment. Thank you, doctor. That means a great deal, especially coming from a medical professional. He studied her for a moment longer, his expression thoughtful. I understand you're new to Pine Ridge. May I ask what brings you here? The question brought reality crashing back. Emma hesitated, unsure how to explain her situation without appearing either pathetic or scandalous. Before she could formulate a response, John Kendall approached them, his face alight with joy and gratitude. Dr. Miss Collins, Mary's asking for you both. The moment passed, and Emma followed the doctor back to Mary's bedside, where the new mother was sitting up, slightly her baby nestled in her arms. I wanted to thank you properly, Mary said, her voice weak but determined, and to tell you we've decided on a name for our daughter. She looked down at the infant with a tender smile. We're calling her Emma Grace, after the woman who saved her life. Unexpected tears sprang to Emma's eyes at this simple, profound gesture. For a few minutes, the bustle of the sick room continued around her. Dr. Mitchell giving instructions for Mary's continued care, Mrs. Parker preparing a late breakfast, John moving between his wife's bedside and the fire with besotted attention to both. Emma stood slightly apart, watching the scene with a curious sense of belonging she hadn't expected to find in this remote cabin. When Dr. Mitchell finally prepared to leave, he turned to Emma. I understand you rode behind Mr. Kendall last night, but given your ordeal in the creek, I prefer you didn't attempt that again so soon. My horse can carry us both back to town if you're ready to return. The offer was practical rather than personal, yet Emma felt a flutter of unease at the prospect of arriving in Pine Ridge, seated behind the doctor on his horse. What little reputation she had left would surely be destroyed. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Mitchell added, I realize it's not ideal from a social perspective, but your health is more important than town gossip. The matter-of-fact statement, so aligned with her own thinking, caught Emma by surprise. She found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. I believe I said something similar last night when I offered to help Mary. Then we understand each other? The doctor replied with a brief answering smile. The ride back to Pine Ridge was conducted mostly in silence. Emma, seated sideways behind Dr. Mitchell on his sturdy gelding, was too aware of both her physical discomfort and the impropriety. of their situation to engage in conversation. For his part, the doctor seemed lost in his own thoughts, occasionally making a professional comment about the birth, but otherwise respecting her quiet. As they approached the outskirts of town, Emma's apprehension grew. What reception awaited her now? How would she explain her borrowed dress, her return with the doctor, her night spent at the Kendall cabin? More importantly, what would she do tomorrow and the day after that? The return ticket to Boston still waited in her hotel room, an escape route that seemed simultaneously more practical and less appealing than before. As they rode down Pine Ridge's main street, Emma could feel curious eyes tracking their progress. The town was fully awake now, storekeepers sweeping boardwalks, women carrying marketing baskets, men gathering at the telegraph office for news and gossip. All activities seemed to pause momentarily as Dr. Mitchell's horse carried them past, conversations halting mid-sentence, heads turning to observe the bedraggled woman in borrowed clothing seated behind the town's physician. Emma kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the stares or whispers that followed them. Her experience in Boston had taught her that showing shame only encouraged judgment. The doctor reined in before the Westwood Hotel, dismounting smoothly before offering Emma his hand. She accepted his assistance with quiet dignity, ignoring the hotel proprietor who had emerged to witness her return. Her borrowed dress was wrinkled and stained with creek mud at the hem. Her hair had dried in wild disarray, and she knew her appearance alone would fuel speculation for days. Still, she stood straight-backed beside the doctor's horse, remembering the tiny life she had helped usher into the world. Whatever Pine Ridge might think of her now, she had done what was right, what was necessary. Miss Collins acted as midwife to Mary Kendall last night, Dr. Mitchell stated matter-of-factly to the small crowd that had gathered. She successfully delivered a breech birth under extremely difficult circumstances after the bridge at Sawmill Creek collapsed. Both mother and child are well, thanks to her skill. His public acknowledgement of her abilities was unexpected, and Emma felt a rush of gratitude for this professional validation. The doctor turned to her, his expression now reflecting concern, rather than the clinical detachment he had maintained during their journey. "You should rest today, Miss Collins. The immersion in cold water and the physical exertion of the birth would tax even the strongest constitution. I'll check on you this evening, if you permit it." Emma nodded, suddenly aware of how utterly exhausted she truly was. Every muscle ached, her throat felt raw from coughing up creek water, and the emotional strain of the past 24 hours pressed down upon her like a physical weight. "Thank you, Dr. Mitchell," she managed. That would be acceptable. She turned toward the hotel entrance, conscious of the whispers that had already resumed behind her. The hotel proprietor's wife met her in the lobby, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been reluctant respect. "Your room's still available, Miss Collins, and I've had a bath prepared. Thought you might need it after." She gestured vaguely toward Emma's disheveled state. The unexpected kindness brought a lump to Emma's throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That's very thoughtful." The hot bath was transformative, washing away creek mud and the lingering chill that seemed embedded in her bones. Clean and dressed in her own clothing once more, Emma felt almost human again. She brushed out her damp hair before the small mirror, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the pallor of her skin. The events at the Kendall farm seemed almost dreamlike now, yet the memory of placing that tiny infant in her mother's arms remained crystal clear. It was the purpose she had found in Boston during her mother's illness, using knowledge to ease suffering, bringing her skills to bear in moments of crisis. Walter Simmons had rejected her for those very qualities, yet they had saved 2 lives. Last night, perhaps there was a place for her in the West after all, even if not the one she had originally envisioned. Emma slept deeply for several hours, awakening to late afternoon sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to time and place. The events of the previous night rushing back with startling clarity. A knock at her door roused her fully. Emma quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her dress before answering, half expecting to find Mrs. Holloway come to deliver the town's official disapproval. Instead, Clara Peterson stood in the hallway, little Abigail clinging to her skirts with one hand and clutching a small posy of spring wildflowers in the other. "Miss Collins," Clara greeted her with a warm smile. "We heard you had returned. How are you feeling?" Emma ushered them into the small room, touched by the gesture of friendship. "Much better after rest and a bath," she admitted, "though I'm still a bit sore from my dunking in the creek." Clara sat on the room's only chair, settling Abigail on her lap. The child regarded Emma solemnly with large blue eyes, then shyly extended the wildflowers. "These for you," she said in a tiny voice, "because you help people." Emma accepted the simple bouquet with genuine pleasure. "Thank you, Abigail. They're beautiful." Clara's expression grew more serious. "Everyone's talking about what you did at the Kendall farm. Dr. Mitchell told Samuel, Reverend Peterson, that he couldn't have managed better himself if he'd been there." She hesitated, glancing at her daughter before continuing in a lower voice. "Of course, not everyone sees it that way. Mrs. Holloway is saying it was highly improper for an unmarried woman to spend the night at a stranger's home, and even more improper to return to town with the doctor in such a familiar manner." Emma had expected nothing less. "And what does Reverend Peterson say about it?" she asked, curious about Clara's husband's position. "Samuel believes that saving lives transcends social niceties," Clara replied with quiet pride. "He told Mrs. Holloway that the Good Samaritan didn't worry about his reputation when helping a stranger in need." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small paper packet. "I also wanted to give you this, for your herbal remedy for Abigail's cough. I got everything on your list." Emma accepted the packet, momentarily confused until she remembered their conversation from the previous day. A lifetime ago, it seemed now. "Thank you. I'll prepare it tonight and bring it to you tomorrow." Clara shook her head quickly. "Samuel thought perhaps you could come to the parsonage to prepare it. It would be seen as more appropriate than delivering medicines to homes alone." The diplomatic suggestion clearly came from concern for Emma's already precarious standing in Pine Ridge. "Of course," Emma agreed. "Tomorrow morning, if that suits you." Clara smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Perfect. And perhaps you might stay for dinner afterward. Samuel would like to thank you personally for helping the Kendalls." The invitation represented more than a meal. It was a public endorsement from the town's spiritual leader. Emma recognized both the kindness and the strategic value of such support. "I would be honored," she replied sincerely. After Clara and Abigail departed, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, the wildflowers cradled in her hands, considering this unexpected turn of events. The minister's approbation wouldn't change Walter Simmons's decision or transform Pine Ridge's attitudes overnight, but it offered a small foothold, a chance to establish herself as something other than a failed mail-order bride deemed too wild. For marriage, the Boston return ticket remained on her writing desk, untouched. Each hour that passed made it less likely she would use it. Another knock interrupted her musings, this one more decisive than Clara's gentle tap. Emma opened the door to find Dr. Mitchell standing in the hallway, medical bag in hand, his expression professionally neutral. "Miss Collins, I've come to check on your condition, as promised." Emma stepped back to allow him entry, suddenly conscious of the room's intimate dimensions. The doctor seemed to share her awareness of the impropriety, for he left the door partially open and remained standing rather than taking the chair. "I'm much recovered, doctor, thank you," Emma said, maintaining a formal tone. "Just some residual soreness from the creek's rough handling." Dr. Mitchell nodded, his gaze sweeping over her with clinical assessment rather than personal interest. "No fever, no persistent cough or difficulty breathing?" "None at all." "Good. Immersion in spring meltwater often leads to lung inflammation. You were fortunate." There was a brief silence, neither uncomfortable nor easy, as if both were measuring the appropriate boundaries of their interaction. Emma found herself studying the doctor more carefully than their previous brief encounters had allowed. Thomas Mitchell appeared to be in his mid-30s, with the weathered complexion of a man who spent considerable time outdoors despite his profession. His dark hair was slightly too long for Eastern fashion, and a neatly trimmed beard framed features that were more interesting than conventionally handsome. His hands, she noticed, were large but dexterous, the fingers long and capable-looking, a surgeon's hands. What struck her most, however, was his direct gaze, devoid of the condescension she had come to expect from medical men. He had spoken to her as an equal at the Kendall farm, valuing her observations and treating her knowledge with respect. It was, Emma realized, the first time since her arrival in Pine Ridge that anyone had truly seen her capabilities rather than merely judging her conformity to expectations. The doctor cleared his throat slightly, breaking the moment of scrutiny. "I understand Walter Simmons has withdrawn his marriage offer." The direct reference to her situation momentarily startled Emma. "News travels quickly in Pine Ridge," she observed, neither confirming nor denying. "It does," Dr. Mitchell agreed, "though in this case I heard it directly from Simmons himself at the barber shop yesterday. He seemed concerned that I might encounter you professionally and should know your status." A flush of humiliation heated Emma's cheeks. Even in this, Walter had managed to undermine her standing. "How thoughtful of him to warn you of my unsuitability," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Dr. Mitchell's expression remained neutral, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. Perhaps anger, though not directed at her. Simmons values conformity above capability. It makes him an excellent merchant, but a limited judge of character. The assessment, delivered without heat but with evident conviction, surprised a small laugh from Emma. "That's a remarkably diplomatic way to call him short-sighted." The doctor's mouth curved in a brief smile that transformed his serious countenance. "I'm occasionally diplomatic when the situation warrants it." The smile faded as he continued. "I actually came to discuss another matter as well as your health, Miss Collins. I find myself in need of assistance in my practice." Emma's heart quickened. Clara had mentioned this possibility, but hearing it directly from Dr. Mitchell was unexpectedly affecting. "What sort of assistance?" she asked carefully, unwilling to presume. "I need someone with medical knowledge to help maintain my surgery and assist with patients. The mining camp 15 miles north has expanded, bringing new injuries and ailments. I can't manage both the town's needs and regular visits to the camp without help." He paused, studying her reaction. "After witnessing your competence last night, I believe you have the necessary knowledge and temperament for the position. It would be unconventional, certainly, but I've found conventional thinking rarely serves frontier medicine well." Emma hesitated, weighing both the opportunity and its implications. Working with the doctor would provide the purpose she sought, utilizing her skills rather than suppressing them. Yet it would also confirm her reputation as too untraditional for proper society. "The town would talk," she said finally. "They'll say I'm improper, wild, unsuitable as a physician's assistant." "They'll talk regardless," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Pragmatically, the question is whether you'll give them reason to talk while doing something meaningful, or simply endure their judgment while conforming to their limitations." Put that way, the choice seemed suddenly clear. "When would you Want me to start? The doctor's expression warmed with approval. Monday morning, if you're sufficiently recovered. I'll pay $8 a week to start, with room and board in my household. Mrs. Cooper, my housekeeper, provides an appropriate chaperone to prevent additional speculation. It was a generous salary for a woman's work, particularly with lodging included. Emma felt a surge of gratitude for his recognition of her worth. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I accept your offer. He nodded, seemingly pleased but unsurprised by her decision. Good. I'll inform Mrs. Cooper to prepare the guest room. He moved toward the door, then paused. I should mention that I'm considered somewhat unconventional myself in Pine Ridge. My methods aren't always traditional, and I've been known to incorporate remedies from sources most medical colleges would consider unsuitable. Emma sensed there was more to this admission than professional candor, such as Native American herbal treatments, Mexican curandera practices, Chinese medicine from the railroad workers, anything that works, regardless of its origin. He was watching her closely, she realized, gauging her reaction to this revelation. You're testing me, Emma said with sudden insight, to see if I'm as open-minded about medicine as I claim to be. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a nod of acknowledgement. Perhaps many who consider themselves progressive draw the line at primitive healing traditions. Emma thought of her precious book on botanical medicine, with its careful notes on native plant remedies. I believe knowledge has value regardless of its source, she said simply. And healing is healing, whether it comes wrapped in a Latin name or a tribal tradition. Something in the doctor's posture eased slightly. Then we'll work well together, Miss Collins. With a brief nod of farewell, he departed, leaving Emma standing in the center of her small room, the future suddenly reoriented around this unexpected opportunity. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of practical considerations. Emma organized her few belongings, mentally cataloging what she would need for her new position. Her funds, while limited, would stretch to a few necessary purchases: an additional dress suitable for a physician's assistant, proper shoes to replace her city boots that had suffered in the creek, perhaps some modest hairpins to maintain a professional appearance. She penned a brief note to Mrs. Davis, informing her she would vacate the room on Sunday, then sat down to compose a more substantial letter to her former neighbor in Boston. Mrs. Winters had been kind during her mother's final illness, and Emma felt she deserved to know that the journey west had taken an unexpected turn. As twilight descended over Pine Ridge, Emma found herself drawn to the window, watching the lamplights illuminate the town's main street. From her vantage point, she could see Walter Simmons closing his store for the evening, meticulously adjusting the window display before locking the door. Further down, the Petersons walked together toward the church, little Abigail skipping between them. Dr. Mitchell's surgery stood at the far end of the street, a modest building with living quarters attached behind it. Smoke curled from its chimney into the darkening sky, a sign of warmth and habitation within. Emma rested her forehead against the cool glass, contemplating how quickly life could change course. 3 days ago, she had arrived expecting to become Mrs. Walter Simmons, merchant's wife and model of Eastern refinement on the frontier. Now she was preparing to assist the town doctor, using the very knowledge and skills that had marked her as unsuitable for marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her, yet beneath the irony lay a sense of rightness, of finding a path that honored her true self, rather than forcing her into a mold fashioned by others' expectations. Tomorrow, she would visit the Petersons, prepare Abigail's remedy, and begin establishing herself in her new role. Pine Ridge might not approve, but they would have to accept her presence, especially with the minister's family offering their support. In time, perhaps they would even come to value her contributions. Emma stepped away from the window, turning her attention to practical preparations for the next day. The return ticket to Boston lay forgotten on the writing desk. its purpose, now obsolete. She had found her place in the West, after all, not as a conventional bride, but as something far more suited to her nature. A healer, a woman of knowledge, valued for her mind rather than her conformity. Sunday morning dawned clear and mild, the spring sun casting long shadows across Pine Ridge as Emma made her way to the small white church at the edge of town. She had debated attending services, knowing her presence would likely cause a stir, but ultimately decided that avoiding public appearances would only feed speculation. Better to face the town's scrutiny directly, with the dignity of one who had nothing to hide. She wore her best dress, a modest blue wool that had survived the journey west relatively unscathed, and had arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. The church bell was still ringing as she approached, joining the stream of townspeople making their way toward the building. Conversations hushed noticeably as she passed, heads turning to track her progress, whispers following in her wake. Emma kept her gaze forward, her pace steady, though her heart beat a rapid rhythm against her ribs. This public appearance represented her first test, establishing herself as neither ashamed nor defiant, but simply present as a new member of the community. Inside the church, Emma slipped into a pew near the back, hoping to attract minimal attention. Her hope proved futile. Nearly every head in the congregation turned at some point during the preliminaries to observe the failed mail-order bride who had delivered the Kendall baby and would now be working with Dr. Mitchell. Emma focused on the simple wooden cross at the front of the church, drawing strength from its uncomplicated symbolism of sacrifice and service. When Reverend Peterson ascended to the pulpit, his kind eyes swept over his congregation before settling briefly on Emma with a small nod of acknowledgement. His sermon, perhaps coincidentally, centered on the parable of the Good Samaritan, emphasizing the duty to help those in need regardless of social boundaries or personal cost. The message wasn't lost on the congregation. Emma could feel the weight of consideration shifting in the room, some faces softening in reflection, others hardening in resistance to the implied criticism of their judgment. As the final hymn concluded and the congregation began to disperse, Emma remained seated, allowing the crush to thin before making her own exit. She was surprised when a shadow fell across her pew, and she looked up to find Sheriff Jack Thornton standing beside her, his weathered face set in lines of official courtesy. "Miss Collins," he greeted her, removing his hat, "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for the Kendalls. John's been a good friend to me since I came to Pine Ridge." Emma rose, extending her hand in the direct manner she'd observed Western women employ. "There's no need for thanks, Sheriff. I only did what anyone with my training would have done." He took her hand briefly, his handshake firm but respectful. "That's just it, Miss Collins. Not everyone would have had your training or your courage. That creek's dangerous even in summer, let alone during spring melt." His frank acknowledgement of her actions, delivered without qualification or judgment, struck Emma as refreshingly honest. "Dr. Mitchell tells me you'll be working with him starting tomorrow," the sheriff continued, glancing toward the church door where several townspeople lingered, openly watching their interaction. "It's good to have another person with medical knowledge in Pine Ridge. The town's growing faster than we can keep up with sometimes." This public endorsement from the town's law enforcement was as valuable as the minister's in its way. Emma recognized it as a deliberate choice on the sheriff's part, establishing his support for her new position. "Thank you, Sheriff Thornton. I hope to be of service to the community." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Thomas is a good man," he added in a lower voice. "Unorthodox as doctors go, but the best I've seen this side of Denver. You'll do well with him if you can handle a few raised eyebrows." With that cryptic assessment, he departed, leaving Emma to consider its implications. She had gathered that Dr. Mitchell was considered somewhat unconventional, but the sheriff's comment suggested there might be more to the town's view of him than merely professional eccentricity. Emma filed this information away for future consideration as she made her way out of the church and into the bright spring sunshine. Clara Peterson was waiting for her on the church steps, her expression warm with welcome. "Emma, I'm so glad you came. Samuel was hoping you would." Her use of Emma's given name, here in public view, was another deliberate signal of acceptance and friendship. "We're expecting you at the parsonage now for dinner, aren't we? Abigail has been talking of nothing else since yesterday." Emma smiled, genuinely touched by the child's enthusiasm. "I wouldn't miss it, and I've been thinking about the cough remedy as well. I believe I can improve it with a bit of wild cherry bark for flavor. Children are more likely to take medicine that doesn't taste entirely unpleasant." Clara linked her arm through Emma's. As they walked toward the modest house adjacent to the church, her gesture a public declaration of friendship and support. "Samuel says you've accepted a position with Dr. Mitchell," she said conversationally, though Emma detected an undercurrent of concern. "As his assistant, yes. Beginning tomorrow." Clara squeezed her arm gently. "I'm glad you're staying in Pine Ridge, though you should know that Thomas Mitchell has his own reputation in town, not all of it complimentary." Emma glanced at her new friend curiously, because of his unconventional medical practices. "Partly," Clara acknowledged, "but also because of his past. There are rumors." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with gossip despite her desire to prepare Emma. "Thomas doesn't speak of it, but it's said he was a prominent surgeon back east before coming here. Something happened, a personal tragedy of some kind, that brought him to the frontier." Emma considered this information thoughtfully. It explained something of the doctor's reserved manner and the occasional shadow she had glimpsed in his eyes. "Everyone has a past," she said finally. "What matters is the good he does here and now." Clara's expression cleared with evident relief. "That's exactly what Samuel says, though not everyone in Pine Ridge shares that perspective." The parsonage was a modest but welcoming home, filled with the aroma of roasting chicken and fresh bread. Reverend Peterson greeted Emma with genuine warmth, thanking her sincerely for her assistance to the Kendalls. Throughout the meal, Emma found herself included in family conversations, her opinions solicited and respected in a way that felt both novel and deeply affirming after the rejection she had experienced. While Clara cleared away the dishes, Emma prepared Abigail's cough remedy at the kitchen table, carefully measuring the herbs and explaining each step to the fascinated child. "This tastes better than the doctor's medicine," Abigail declared after sampling a tiny spoonful of the completed mixture. "And it doesn't make my tummy hurt." Emma smiled, pleased with the result. "That's because we've balanced the strength of the medicine with ingredients that protect your stomach. Medicine works best when the body accepts it willingly." Reverend Peterson, who had been observing from the doorway, nodded thoughtfully. "A wise philosophy, Miss Collins, one that applies to more than just physical healing, I think." His gentle words carried a deeper meaning that Emma understood implicitly. Change came more easily to communities when introduced with similar care and respect for existing sensibilities. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Pine Ridge, Emma bid farewell to the Peterson family, carrying with her not just their thanks, but a sense of having found allies in this small frontier town. She walked slowly back toward the hotel, savoring the mild spring air and the quiet beauty of the surrounding mountains. The main street was largely deserted, most families gathered for Sunday dinner in their homes. As she passed Wilson's General Store, the door opened unexpectedly, and Walter Simmons emerged, nearly colliding with her on the boardwalk. For a moment they stood frozen in mutual surprise, the awkwardness of their situation hanging palpably between them. Walter recovered first, stiffly removing his hat in formal acknowledgement. "Miss Collins." Emma inclined her head slightly. determined to maintain her composure. "Mr. Simmons." A tense silence followed, broken only when Walter cleared his throat. Uncomfortably, "I understand you've taken a position with Dr. Mitchell." His tone made it clear what he thought of this development. "Yes," Emma replied simply, seeing no need to elaborate. Walter's expression tightened with disapproval. "It's an unusual choice for a woman of your background." The implicit criticism stung, but Emma refused to show it. "On the contrary, Mr. Simmons, given my experience assisting a midwife in Boston and my knowledge of herbal medicines, it seems a natural application of my skills." Walter's gaze flicked past her to the empty street, as if concerned they might be observed in conversation. "I feel I should warn you, Miss Collins. Dr. Mitchell has a controversial reputation. Associating with him professionally will only confirm certain impressions about your character that might otherwise fade with time." The condescension in his voice, the presumption that she required his guidance even after he had rejected her, ignited a spark of anger in Emma's chest. "By certain impressions, I assume you mean the belief that I'm too wild, too educated, too independent for proper society?" she asked with deliberate directness. Walter winced at her bluntness. "I only meant—" "I understand precisely what you meant, Mr. Simmons," Emma interrupted, her voice level despite her indignation. "You're concerned that I might find fulfillment in a role you consider inappropriate, rather than conforming to Pine Ridge's expectations of proper womanhood." She took a deep breath, calming herself before continuing. "But you see, those qualities you found so unsuitable in a wife, my education, my knowledge of medicine, my independent thinking, are exactly what Dr. Mitchell values in an assistant. What you saw as flaws, he recognizes as assets." Walter's face had reddened with embarrassment or anger, perhaps both. "I see you've made your choice, then." "I have," Emma agreed calmly. "And I wish you well in finding a wife whose temperament better suits your needs." With a brief nod of farewell, she continued past him, her steps measured and unhurried despite the rapid beating of her heart. It was only as she reached the hotel that Emma realized the encounter had shifted something fundamental within her. The humiliation of Walter's rejection, which had stung so sharply just days ago, had lost its power to wound her. In its place was a growing certainty that she had narrowly escaped a life of stifling conformity that would have slowly extinguished her true nature. Her path now lay in a different direction, one that honored her knowledge and abilities rather than suppressing them. Tomorrow she would begin her work with Dr. Mitchell, establishing herself in Pine Ridge, not as a wife valued for her conformity, but as a healer valued for her mind. The town might whisper, might judge, might continue to brand her as wild by their standards. But for the first time since arriving in the West, Emma felt not just resigned to her situation, but genuinely hopeful about her future. She had found her worth not in meeting others' expectations, but in the courage to be true to her own nature and abilities. Monday morning arrived with a pale spring sun that cast long shadows across Pine Ridge, as Emma Collins gathered her few possessions and prepared to leave the Westwood Hotel. She had slept fitfully, her mind occupied with thoughts of the new position, awaiting her and the challenges it would surely bring. Her small trunk contained little. The clothing she had brought from Boston, her precious medical and botanical books, and a few personal mementos of her mother. The return ticket to Boston lay on the writing desk, a path not taken. After a moment's hesitation, Emma picked it up and tucked it into her journal as a reminder of how quickly life could change course. Mrs. Davis appeared at her door promptly at 8 o'clock, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been respect. "Dr. Mitchell's housekeeper is downstairs to escort you, Miss Collins. Sent the boy to help with your trunk." Her tone was neutral, but her gaze swept the room with evident interest, assessing what kind of woman would choose the position Emma had accepted. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Davis," Emma said sincerely, extending her hand. "You've been very kind." The older woman hesitated before accepting the handshake, her weathered face softening slightly. "You did right by the Kendalls," she said finally. "That counts for something in Pine Ridge, whatever else folks might say." Downstairs, Emma found a robust woman in her 50s waiting in the lobby, her practical dress and no-nonsense demeanor, marking her as someone who managed a household with efficiency. "Miss Collins, I'm Mrs. Cooper, Dr. Mitchell's housekeeper." Her handshake was firm, her assessment direct, but not unkind. "The doctor's already been called out to the Carson farm. New. Baby coming. He asked me to get you settled this morning, then you're to organize the surgery supplies. Said you'd know what was needed." Emma appreciated the straightforward approach. "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. I'm ready whenever you are." A gangly youth of perhaps 16 appeared to handle Emma's trunk, and together they made their way down Pine Ridge's main street. Emma was acutely aware of curtains twitching in windows as they passed. The news of her new position clearly a matter of intense interest to the townspeople. She kept her head high, her pace unhurried but purposeful. Let them look, let them whisper. She had found her place, even if it wasn't the one they deemed appropriate for a woman. Dr. Mitchell's residence stood at the far end of town, a modest but well-maintained structure, with the doctor's surgery occupying the front portion and living quarters extending behind. A small garden, still dormant from winter but showing signs of careful planning, wrapped around one side of the house. Mrs. Cooper led Emma through a side entrance directly into a tidy kitchen warmed by a cast-iron stove. "This is my domain," she explained, gesturing to the well-organized space. "I handle all the cooking and general housekeeping. Doctor takes his breakfast at 6, dinner at noon when he's not out on calls, and supper at 7. He's not particular about food, but he likes it hot and on time." She moved through the kitchen to a short hallway that led to the back of the house. "Surgery's through the front, but we'll get to that after you're settled. Your room's here." She opened a door to reveal a small but pleasant chamber, furnished with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a desk positioned beneath a window that overlooked the side garden. The walls were whitewashed, the floor covered with a simple braided rug, and clean curtains framed the window. It was modest, but far more comfortable than Emma had expected. "Doctor had me air it out yesterday," Mrs. Cooper explained. "Been used for storage mostly since he came to Pine Ridge. Bathroom's down the hall. We've got running water inside, which is more than most in town can say. Doctor insisted on proper plumbing when he bought the place." The pride in her voice made it clear she considered indoor plumbing a mark of civilization in this frontier town. The boy deposited Emma's trunk at the foot of the bed and departed with the coin Mrs. Cooper pressed into his hand. The housekeeper remained in the doorway, studying Emma with frank curiosity. "Been with Dr. Mitchell since he came to Pine Ridge. 2 years ago," she said finally. "First assistant he's hired, though. Most folks hereabouts don't understand half of what he does or why, but they come quick enough when they're hurting." There was a question in her statement, an unspoken inquiry about Emma's qualifications and intentions. "I assisted a midwife in Boston for several years during my mother's illness," Emma explained, recognizing the importance of establishing a rapport with this woman who clearly held a position of trust in the household. "I've studied medical texts and herbal remedies extensively, though I have no formal training." Mrs. Cooper nodded, seemingly satisfied with this honest assessment. "Doctor said you delivered the Kendall baby. Breech birth, creek nearly drowned you, and you still saved mother and child. That tells me more than any fancy certificate." Her direct gaze held Emma's steadily. "I run a respectable house, Miss Collins. The doctor's reputation matters to me, as does yours now that you're under this roof." There'll be talk regardless, but we needn't give them additional reason. The implicit question of propriety had been addressed head-on, which Emma appreciated. I understand completely, Mrs. Cooper. I'm here to work as Dr. Mitchell's assistant, nothing more. My conduct will reflect that professional relationship. The housekeeper nodded, a hint of approval warming her stern features. Then we'll get along fine. Unpack your things, then I'll show you the surgery. Left alone, Emma moved to the window, gazing out at the small garden where early spring growth was just beginning to emerge from the soil. An herb section was visible along one edge, the orderly rows suggesting someone with knowledge of medicinal plants had planned the space. The view extended beyond the garden to the majestic Elk Mountain Range in the distance, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the morning sun. This room, this view, would be her home now. Not the grand merchant's house Walter Simmons had promised, but a place where her knowledge and abilities would be valued rather than suppressed. Emma felt a sudden surge of gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken. The rejection that had seemed so devastating just days ago had led her to a position far better suited to her true nature. After unpacking her few belongings and changing into a fresh shirtwaist and skirt suitable for work, Emma joined Mrs. Cooper for a tour of the surgery. The front portion of the house had been converted into a functional medical office with a waiting area furnished with sturdy benches, a consultation room with the doctor's desk and examination table, and a small surgery equipped with surprisingly modern medical instruments. A third room, lined with shelves containing medicines, bandages, and supplies, completed the professional space. Tomorrow morning I need to ride out to check on the Kendalls. Would you feel comfortable managing the surgery alone for a few hours? Nothing scheduled beyond basic wound care and medication dispensing. The question represented a significant vote of confidence in her abilities after just one day. Yes, I believe I can handle that, Emma replied, determined to prove worthy of his trust. Excellent. We'll review what you might expect before I leave. As they completed the day's documentation and prepared the surgery for the next morning, Emma found herself studying Dr. Mitchell when his attention was elsewhere. Today had provided her first extended opportunity to observe him in his professional element, and what she had seen intrigued her. Thomas Mitchell was clearly a well-trained physician, his diagnostic skills and surgical precision speaking to formal education at a respected medical college. Yet he practiced with a flexibility and open-mindedness rare among Eastern doctors, willingly incorporating effective treatments regardless of their source. There was a quiet confidence to his work, a certainty born of experience rather than arrogance. Most striking was his manner with patients. He treated the ranch hand with the same respect he showed the mayor's wife, who had stopped in for headache powder, listening with equal attention to their concerns. It was, Emma reflected, a stark contrast to Walter Simmons's rigid adherence to social hierarchies and conventional thinking. That evening, Emma joined Dr. Mitchell and Mrs. Cooper for supper in the small dining room adjacent to the kitchen. The meal was simple but well prepared: roast chicken, potatoes, early spring greens from the garden, and fresh bread. Mrs. Cooper served efficiently before taking her own place at the table, a household arrangement that spoke of practicality rather than strict social divisions. Dr. Mitchell blessed the food briefly, then turned the conversation to practical matters. Mrs. Cooper tells me you've completely transformed our supply room, Miss Collins. I hope you found everything in reasonable order, if not perfectly organized. His tone was lightly self-deprecating, acknowledging the chaos Emma had sorted through, without defensiveness. The supplies themselves were excellent, Emma replied diplomatically, just in need of a systematic arrangement. I've noted several items running low that might need ordering from Denver soon. The conversation continued in this practical vein throughout the meal, focusing on surgery needs, patient follow-ups, and community health matters. Emma was struck by the comfortable dynamic between Dr. Mitchell and Mrs. Cooper, who clearly functioned as more than just a housekeeper. The older woman offered observations about various patients' compliance with treatment, noted which families might need additional assistance, and generally demonstrated her role as the doctor's eyes and ears in the community. Young Jimmy Peters hasn't been taking that cough syrup regular, she informed Dr. Mitchell. His mother mentioned he spits it out when she's not looking, says it tastes like coal tar. The doctor considered this information thoughtfully. Miss Collins, do you have any suggestions for improving the palatability of cherry bark syrup for a 7-year-old boy? Emma appreciated being included so naturally in the professional discussion. A small amount of honey often helps, or peppermint oil if available. Children are more likely to take medicine that doesn't punish them with the taste. Dr. Mitchell nodded approvingly. We'll try that approach. Mrs. Peters is bringing him in tomorrow morning. You can prepare a modified version then. As the meal concluded, Mrs. Cooper gathered the dishes, waving away Emma's offer of help. First night here, you rest. Plenty of time for dishes in the days ahead. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Emma momentarily alone with Dr. Mitchell. A slightly awkward silence fell between them, the professional ease of their day-long interaction giving way to awareness of their unconventional living arrangement. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat. I typically spend evenings in my study, reviewing medical journals or writing correspondence. You're welcome to use the small parlor for reading or personal activities. Mrs. Cooper retires early, but leaves a lamp burning in the kitchen until 10. His formal tone suggested he was equally conscious of maintaining appropriate boundaries in their shared household. Thank you, Doctor, Emma replied with matching propriety. I have some reading I'd like to catch up on. He rose from the table, inclining his head politely. Then I'll bid you good night, Miss Collins. We'll begin rounds at 6 tomorrow morning. Alone in her room later that evening, Emma sat at the small desk beneath the window, recording the day's events in her journal by lamplight. Outside, Pine Ridge had settled into the quiet of a frontier town after nightfall, only the occasional distant sound of the saloon piano breaking the silence. The mountains loomed as dark shadows against the star-filled sky, their permanent presence. A reminder of how small human concerns were in the grand scope of nature. Emma's pen moved steadily across the page, documenting not just events, but her reflections on this unexpected turn in her life. 3 days ago, she had been a rejected mail-order bride with limited options and an uncertain future. Now she was established as a physician's assistant, her knowledge valued, her capabilities respected, her path forward suddenly clearer than it had been in years. The transition wasn't without complications. She was acutely aware that Pine Ridge society would continue to judge her choice as inappropriate, perhaps even scandalous. Mrs. Holloway and her circle would certainly view Emma's position in the doctor's household with suspicion, regardless of Mrs. Cooper's respectable presence. Yet as she closed her journal and prepared for bed, Emma found that these concerns weighed less heavily than they might have just days ago. She had witnessed Thomas Mitchell's dedication to healing, his integration of diverse medical traditions, his respect for knowledge regardless of its source. Working alongside such a physician offered an opportunity to expand her own abilities while contributing meaningfully to the community that had initially rejected her. If that made her too wild by Pine Ridge standards, perhaps wildness was not the flaw Walter Simmons had deemed it to be, but rather the very quality that would allow her to thrive in this frontier setting. Emma extinguished her lamp and slipped beneath the clean, simple covers of her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the doctor's household settling into night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove her worth. not through conformity, but through capability. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge, she fell asleep not with anxiety about her future, but with quiet confidence in the path she had found. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to Emma's new life in Pine Ridge. Each day began early with rounds, either in town or to outlying homesteads, followed by surgery hours and evening documentation. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying, engaging both her knowledge and her compassion in ways that challenged her to grow. Dr. Mitchell proved to be an excellent mentor, explaining his reasoning for treatments, welcoming her observations, and gradually expanding her responsibilities. As her capabilities became evident, together, they faced the diverse medical challenges of a frontier community: births and deaths, injuries and illnesses, chronic conditions and acute emergencies. Through it all, Emma found herself drawing on the botanical knowledge that had once marked her as unsuitable, now recognized as a valuable component of their practice. The town's attitude toward her remained divided. Some, like the Petersons, offered friendship and support, inviting her to Sunday dinners and defending her choice when others criticized. Sheriff Thornton treated her with professional respect, occasionally stopping by the surgery to discuss health concerns among the prisoners in his small jail. Even Mrs. Davis from the hotel unbent enough to recommend the doctor's new assistant to travelers passing through with medical needs. Others, however, maintained their disapproval. Mrs. Holloway and her circle continued to view Emma as scandalously unconventional, their whispers following her through town like persistent shadows. Walter Simmons avoided her entirely, crossing the street rather than passing her on the boardwalk, his rigid posture and averted gaze speaking volumes about his continued judgment of her character. Emma found she cared less about these opinions with each passing day. The gratitude in Mary Kendall's eyes when she successfully treated the baby's colic meant more than Mrs. Holloway's sniff of disapproval. The relief on William Harrison's face when his wound healed completely, preserving the function of his only arm, outweighed Walter Simmons' pointed avoidance. Most importantly, Dr. Mitchell's growing trust in her abilities confirmed that she had found her true calling, not as a conventional wife, but as a healer in this community that needed her skills more than her conformity. Spring deepened into early summer, the landscape transforming from the tentative green of April to the lush abundance of June. Dr. Mitchell's garden flourished under Mrs. Cooper's care, medicinal herbs now ready for harvesting alongside vegetables for the kitchen. Emma spent her rare free hours helping with this task, carefully collecting and preparing plants for the remedies they had incorporated into their practice. It was during one such evening, as they worked side by side in the lengthening shadows, that Dr. Mitchell first spoke of his past. "I was a surgeon in Chicago before coming west," he said quietly, his hands continuing their methodical work with the chamomile blossoms they were gathering. "My wife, Elizabeth, was expecting our first child. There were complications." His voice faltered slightly before regaining its steadiness. "I couldn't save either of them, despite everything I knew, everything I had been trained to do." Emma remained silent, recognizing the cost of this confidence, letting him continue at his own pace. "Afterward, I couldn't bear to remain where every street, every building held memories. A colleague mentioned the need for physicians in the Colorado Territory, and I left without looking back." He straightened, meeting Emma's gaze directly. "I tell you this, not for sympathy, but because you should understand why I sometimes approach medicine differently than other doctors. Losing Elizabeth taught me that conventional wisdom isn't always enough. Sometimes we need to look beyond our training, incorporate knowledge from sources medical colleges would dismiss." Emma nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "That's why you're open to botanical remedies, to Native American healing practices." "Yes. I've found healing myself by healing others in ways I wouldn't have considered before." He returned to his harvesting, the moment of personal revelation passing, but leaving a new depth to their professional relationship. Emma felt honored by his trust, and something else she wasn't quite ready to examine, a warmth that had been growing steadily since their first meeting, a connection that went beyond shared medical interests. Their collaborative approach was put to the ultimate test when diphtheria struck Pine Ridge in early July. The disease arrived with a wagon train of settlers passing through on their way further west, leaving behind a contagion that spread rapidly. Through the town's children, the first cases appeared in the schoolhouse, 3 children with the telltale sore throats and gray membrane that marked the deadly illness. Within days, a dozen more had fallen ill, and panic gripped the community. Dr. Mitchell converted the waiting room of the surgery into an isolation ward for the most serious cases, working tirelessly alongside Emma to treat the afflicted while trying to prevent further spread. Conventional medical wisdom offered little beyond comfort measures and hope, but Dr. Mitchell and Emma implemented a more aggressive approach. Drawing on both his formal training and their shared knowledge of botanical medicine, they developed a treatment combining throat swabbing to remove the membrane, steam inhalation with pine and eucalyptus to ease breathing, and a tonic of echinacea, and golden seal to support the body's fight against infection. The regimen required constant attention, with Emma often spending entire nights moving from bed to bed, sponging fevered brows and helping struggling children breathe through the worst of the membrane's obstruction. The crisis reached its peak when Abigail Peterson fell ill, the minister's daughter deteriorating rapidly despite their best efforts. Emma sat with the child through a nightmarish evening, her small body burning with fever, her breathing increasingly labored as the membrane thickened in her throat. Clara Peterson prayed silently in the corner while Reverend Peterson paced outside, his faith wrestling with fear for his daughter's life. Near midnight, as Abigail's breathing became alarmingly shallow, Emma made a decision. The conventional treatments weren't enough. She sent for Dr. Mitchell, who arrived quickly from attending another critical case across town. "I want to try something," Emma said without preamble. "The Navajo remedy you mentioned, the one you observed during your time at Fort Defiance. You said it helped clear the breathing passages when nothing else worked." Dr. Mitchell hesitated, only briefly. "It's untested by medical standards, highly unorthodox." "Abigail doesn't have time for orthodox," Emma replied, her gaze steady on the struggling child. "We need to try everything." He nodded once, decisively. "I'll prepare it. It requires precise dosing." Together they worked swiftly, creating the potent herbal mixture and administering it with careful attention to Abigail's reactions. For an hour, nothing seemed to change. Then, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the child's breathing eased as the membrane began to loosen its deadly grip. By dawn, Abigail's fever had broken, and she was breathing more freely than she had in days. Word of the recovery spread quickly through Pine Ridge. Other parents with sick children came to the surgery, desperately seeking the same treatment. Dr. Mitchell and Emma worked without rest, preparing the remedy and instructing families in its use alongside their other treatments. Not every child responded as dramatically as Abigail. 3 of the most severely ill were already beyond help, but many began to show improvement. The disease's deadly progress halted by this unconventional approach. By the end of the week, the outbreak had peaked, with new cases declining and many of the sick beginning the slow process of recovery. In the aftermath, something shifted in Pine Ridge's perception of Emma Collins. The woman once judged too wild, too educated for proper marriage, had proven those very qualities essential in the town's hour of need. Mothers whose children had recovered stopped Emma on the street to express their gratitude. Men nodded respectfully when she passed, acknowledging her role in saving their families. Even Mrs. Holloway, whose own grandson had been among those treated, grudgingly admitted that perhaps some education in a woman could serve a purpose in frontier circumstances. Most profound was the change in Emma's relationship with Dr. Mitchell. The crisis had forged a partnership deeper than mere professional collaboration, a bond of trust, mutual respect, and something more that neither had yet named but both increasingly acknowledged in small ways. He sought her opinion more frequently, not just on botanical remedies, but on all aspects of their practice. She found herself sharing thoughts and observations she had previously kept private, confident now in their reception. They moved together through the surgery with the synchronized understanding of two people whose minds operated in harmony, anticipating each other's needs and complementing each other's approaches. On a warm evening in late July, as they sat on the small porch behind the surgery, watching the sunset paint the Elk Mountains in shades of gold and purple, Dr. Mitchell finally gave voice to what had been growing between them. "When I hired you as my assistant, Miss Collins, I thought I was gaining a capable helper with useful knowledge of herbal remedies." His voice was thoughtful, his gaze still on the distant mountains. "I didn't anticipate finding a true partner. In medicine, someone whose perspective would both challenge and complement my own." He turned to her then, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Nor did I expect to find someone who would help me believe in new beginnings when I thought that part of my life was finished." Emma's heart quickened at the personal turn in his words. "Dr. Mitchell, Thomas," he corrected gently. "After all we've faced together, I think we've earned the right to use given names, at least in private." "Thomas," she amended, the name feeling right on her lips. "I came to Pine Ridge expecting a conventional life as a merchant's wife. Instead, I found purpose, respect, and the freedom to use my mind in ways I never thought possible on the frontier." Her voice softened. "I found where I belong, and with whom." He reached across the space between their chairs, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her seat. The touch was simple but profound, the first time he had reached for her, with intent beyond professional interaction. "Pine Ridge was wrong about you being too wild for marriage, Emma," he said quietly. "But Walter Simmons was certainly the wrong man to recognize your true worth." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Emma turned her hand beneath his, their fingers interlacing with natural ease. No further words were needed as they sat together, watching the last light fade from the mountains, the future unfolding before them rich with promise. When Thomas Mitchell finally married Emma Collins 3 months later in Pine Ridge's white clapboard church, the entire town attended, even Walter Simmons, though he stood at the back with a tight expression that suggested he still didn't quite approve. Reverend Peterson conducted the ceremony with evident joy, little Abigail serving as flower girl, her complete recovery a testament to the couple's collaborative approach to medicine. The bride wore a simple but elegant dress ordered from Denver, and in her bouquet alongside the traditional roses were sprigs of the healing herbs that had first connected her to the man she now married. Chamomile for patience, lavender for devotion, rosemary for remembrance of their unique journey together. As they spoke their vows, Emma reflected on the unexpected path that had brought her to this moment. Rejected as a mail-order bride for being too wild, too educated, too independent, she had instead found a man who valued precisely those qualities, who saw her knowledge not as a threat but as a gift, who respected her mind as much as her heart. Together, they would continue healing Pine Ridge, combining traditional medicine with innovative approaches, serving the community that had finally recognized her true worth. The frontier had not tamed Emma Collins. It had given her the freedom to become fully herself, wildness and all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.